the sky tore open. This was not rain. This was a deluge, an atmospheric betrayal. The wind did not howl, it screamed, a high-pitched shriek that ripped through the canyons of New York City, turning skyscrapers into tuning forks. Gutters became rivers. Sidewalks vanished under churning, brown water, and the air itself felt thick, heavy, and determined to drown everything. Alyssa stood in the center of the chaos, a pillar of rapidly dissolving composure. She was locked out. Her car, a metallic gray symbol of her success and her independence, sat silent and mocking. Its alarm light, usually a friendly red blink, was dark. She pressed the button on the key fob, her thumb white with pressure. Click. Nothing. Click, nothing. She pressed it 10, 20 times, a frantic, useless prayer to a dead god of electronics. The water had breached every defense. Her wool coat, tailored and expensive, was a sodden, heavy shroud, dragging her shoulders down. Her hair, which had been styled into a sleek professional sweep just 2 hours ago, was now plastered to her skull in dark, dripping strands that whipped across her face, stinging her eyes. She could feel the cold not just on her skin, but inside her bones. It was a deep, invasive chill, a physical echo of the emptiness that had taken up residence in her chest for the past 6 months. This rain, this absurd, violent storm, felt personal. Each drop that struck her was not a drop. It was a tiny, cold hammer, a relentless percussion reminding her of her own failure, her own magnificent stupidity. She had built buildings that touched the sky. She had negotiated contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, facing down boardrooms full of arrogant men. She, Alyssa, was a force. Yet here she was, defeated by a dead battery and a storm, stranded on a darkening street while the city collapsed around her. It was the perfect, bitter metaphor. Cameron Price had locked her out of his life, his glittering new political world with the same indifferent finality. And now, the universe, in its infinite, cruel sense of humor, had locked her out of her own car. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the useless key fob into the street and watch it be swept away into the sewer. A sudden, blinding light cut through the gray sheet of water. It was not the warm, yellow cone of a taxi. These were sharp, white beams, so bright they seemed to dry the air they touched. A car, long and impossibly black, slid to a stop directly in front of her. It did not splash through the puddles. It seemed to part them, the water moving aside as if in deference. It was silent, save for the low, almost subsonic purr of an engine that spoke of obscene power held in perfect check. Alyssa froze, one hand still gripping the useless fob. The car idled. A black predator in the urban jungle. The windows were tinted so dark they reflected the storm like obsidian mirrors. Then, the back door on her side unlatched. There was no sound, just a solid mechanical thunk, and the door swung open with a smooth, expensive whisper. A voice came from the darkness within. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was a man's voice, deep and resonant, with a warmth that felt like velvet, but under the warmth was a foundation of steel. It was a voice that did not make requests. It issued commands. Inside. One word. It cut through the shriek of the wind and the roar of the rain as if they did not exist. Alyssa stared, momentarily deaf to the storm. Her heart, which had been a cold lump in her chest, gave a painful, sudden kick. She squinted, trying to see the man in the back seat, but the interior was a cave of shadows, broken only by the dim glow of a dashboard light. She could make out a shape, a large man, sitting back against the leather, unmoving. He was not leaning forward. He was not trying to help. He was simply waiting. She took an instinctive step back, the water sloshing around her ankles. This was New York. You did not get into cars with strangers. You did not accept rides from men who sat in the dark and issued one-word commands. This was how people disappeared. This was the opening scene of a tragedy. But the cold was relentless. A shiver racked her body so violently it made her teeth click together. She looked down the street. It was empty. Not a single taxi. Not a single pedestrian. The city had surrendered. She looked back at the car. The door remained open. An invitation to a different kind of danger. She tried to see his face. She leaned forward, just an inch, peering past the barrier of rain. He was in silhouette, but she could see the sharp, perfect line of his jaw, the white of a shirt cuff, the dark expanse of a suit that was clearly, absurdly, expensive. He was not a driver, he was the one who was driven. Then he shifted, just slightly, and his eyes caught the dim streetlight. They were not warm. They were the opposite of his voice. They were cold, sharp, and utterly calm. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. They were, she thought with a thrill of genuine fear, like knives. He looked at her, not with pity, not with lust, but with a simple, assessing patience. He was not a rescuer. He was an observer. He was, she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her gut, not a normal person. He was not a banker, not a lawyer, not any of the men she knew. This was a different kind of power. This was the kind of power that did not ask. Her mind raced. She was vulnerable, soaked to the skin and desperate. This was exactly how Cameron had found her. All those years ago, not in a storm, but in her own ambition. And he had used it, nurtured it, and then abandoned her when his own ambition required a different partner. She had sworn she would never be that weak again. And yet, the car was warm. She could feel the dry heat wafting from the open door, a stark contrast to the icy misery she was standing in. He was offering a sanctuary, or perhaps a more comfortable cage. The curiosity was a physical thing, a prickling under her skin. Who was he? Why stop? He did not look like a good Samaritan. He looked like he owned the storm itself. She glanced at her own car one last time. It was a useless, dead piece of metal. She was an architect. She built things. She solved problems. Staying on the street was not a solution. It was a surrender. Getting into the car, that was a choice. A reckless, stupid, and possibly fatal choice. But it was a choice. It was action. The man in the car did not move. He did not speak again. He simply watched her. His silence was more compelling than any argument. He had given the command. He was waiting to see if she was smart enough to obey. The word echoed in her head, settling over the panic. Inside, Alyssa took a shuddering breath, tasting the metallic grime of the city in the rain. She looked directly at the dark shape in the car. Her fear was still there, a cold snake in her stomach, but beneath it, something else was rising. Defiance, anger, and a sudden burning need to be out of the rain. She took one step, then another. She reached the open door, her hand trembling as she gripped the handle. She paused, water pouring from her hair in a cascade, and looked into the darkness one last time. His eyes were still on her, unblinking, waiting. She pulled herself in. The heavy door pulled shut with a sound like a bank vault closing, a deep, pressurized thump that severed the shriek of the wind. Suddenly, the world was silent. The chaos of the storm, the pounding rain, the screaming wind, all of it vanished, replaced by a thick, cushioned quiet. The only sound was the steady, relentless sweep of the windshield wipers and the low, subsonic rumble of the engine beneath her feet. Alyssa sat on the edge of the seat, dripping. A large, dark puddle was already forming on the plush carpet. She was a sodden ruin in his pristine, dark sanctuary. She could smell the interior. It was not the synthetic scent of a new car. It smelled of rich, old leather, polished wood, and a faint, clean, metallic scent that she could not place. She felt absurdly self-conscious, like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. She kept her eyes fixed forward, at the thick glass partition that separated them from the driver. The driver was just a broad-shouldered silhouette. Where to? The man's voice, the same one from the storm, resonated in the small space. It had a texture, like dark velvet over steel. It was not a question. It was a prompt for data. Alyssa's mind went blank. Where to home? Her sterile, empty apartment high above the city, the one she had designed herself to be a fortress of solitude and success. She could not show this man where she lived. She could not lead this danger to her door. Just drive, she managed to say. Her voice was thin, a scratch. I need a minute. She felt, more than saw, him nod once. He did not speak again. The car glided away from the curb, moving into the tempest with an impossible, heavy smoothness, as if the storm did not dare to touch it. This feeling, this sudden, disorienting vertigo of being powerless one moment and enveloped in a dangerous, silent luxury the next. It was horribly familiar. It reminded her of the first time she had felt that dizzying sensation of being seen, of being rescued by a man who seemed to own the world. Cameron Price. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. She had not always been Alyssa, the architect whose name was whispered in boardrooms, the woman who built monuments of glass and steel that changed the city's skyline. She had once been just Alyssa, the girl from the wrong neighborhood, with a scholarship and a desperate, burning ambition that felt like a fire in her stomach. She had a goal then, simple and pure, to build things, to create a career so solid, so real, so undeniable, that no one could ever tear it down or take it away from her. She was a woman who believed in blueprints, in stress tests, in deep, unshakable foundations. Cameron had believed in none of those things. He believed in charisma. He believed in connections. He believed in the fluid, shifting sands of public opinion and the art of the perfect smile. They had met when she was young, just 22, and he was 25, a law student with a shock of blonde hair, a smile that could disarm a firing squad, and eyes that saw exactly what you wanted. He had found her in the university library, buried under a mountain of structural diagrams, and had told her, with that blinding, earnest confidence, "You are building the wrong things. You build structures. I am going to build an empire." She had fallen for him, or rather, she had fallen for the idea of him. Their love, or what she had mistaken for love, felt epic. It felt like two young, hungry titans planning their conquest of the world. She drew her buildings. He practiced his speeches, and for a few shining, hopeful years, it seemed like their paths were parallel, destined to rise together. But Cameron changed, or perhaps he had not changed at all. He had simply, slowly, revealed himself. His political star began to rise, a city council seat won by a surprisingly wide margin, a junior assemblyman position. He started speaking differently, his words becoming smoother, more polished, and more empty. He started dressing differently, the worn blazers replaced by suits that cost more than her rent. Their shared we became his royal I, his empire. She realized far too late, had no room for her name on the deed. He did not break up with her in a single, clean fight. There was no dramatic confrontation. It was worse. It was a slow, agonizing fade to black. He became too busy for dinners. His schedule filled with fundraisers and strategy meetings. His phone calls became short texts. His texts became sporadic, then non-existent. He moved into a different world, a glittering, cold world of whispered deals in smoky rooms, of bright photo opportunities with people whose smiles never, ever reached their eyes. He had not just left her behind, he had erased her. The final cut had been the most brutal of all. She had read about his new relationship in the society pages of the newspaper, left open on a table in a coffee shop. Cameron Price, the city's rising star, and his lovely new partner, a political heiress with the right name and the right connections. He had not even afforded her the dignity of a final conversation. He had simply replaced her. The betrayal was absolute. It was not just a broken heart. It felt like a structural failure. The man she had trusted, the man she had planned a future with, had treated her like scaffolding, necessary for the construction, but torn down and discarded as trash once the real, permanent structure was complete. Alyssa did not break. She fractured. But she was an architect. She knew how to handle stress, how to reinforce a weakened point. So she rebuilt herself. She poured every ounce of that pain, that white-hot liquid fury into her work. She graduated at the top of her class. She took a junior position at the most prestigious firm in the city, and she outworked, outsmarted, and outlasted everyone. She slept 4 hours a night. She lived on black coffee and pure, unadulterated spite. She learned to be tougher. She learned to be smarter. She learned to be more ruthless than any of the men who underestimated her, the men who looked at her and saw a pretty face, not a mind that could build cities. And she succeeded. Oh, how she succeeded. Now, 10 years later, she was Alyssa. Her name was on the letterhead. She had her own firm, small but formidable. She was the one who approved the contracts. She was the one who faced down construction unions and city zoning boards. She had built herself into a fortress, strong, independent, self-controlled, and relentlessly practical. She managed her emotions with the same ruthless efficiency she managed her projects. But there was a flaw in the design, a hairline crack in the foundation that no one, not even she, liked to admit was there. She was still haunted. She was successful. Yes, she was powerful. Yes, but she was not free. That old wound, the ghost of Cameron Price, still walked the gleaming, minimalist halls of her perfectly constructed life. She saw his handsome, lying face smiling down at her from billboards, promising reform, promising strength, promising a better future. She heard his smooth, practiced voice on the radio. He was the city's golden boy. He was her own personal antagonist. She hated him. She hated him with a clean, pure, cold intensity. But she also hated, more than anything, that he still had this power over her, this ability to make her feel small, to make her remember the girl she used to be, the girl who could be locked out in the rain. Which brought her back to the car, back to the man sitting in the shadows beside her. She finally risked a glance at him. He was still not looking at her. He was staring out his own window, at the storm lashing the city, his expression unreadable. In the passing glow of streetlights, she could see him more clearly now. He was older than Cameron, perhaps 40. His profile was stark, almost aristocratic, a strong, straight nose, a firm mouth. His dark hair was cut short, meticulously precise. He wore a black suit, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. Over a crisp white shirt, no tie, the top button was undone. He was the physical opposite of Cameron. Cameron was all light, all public charm, all dazzling, empty smiles. This man was shadow. He was silence. He radiated a still, heavy authority that Cameron, with all his desperate striving, could only ever pretend to have. She, Alyssa, the smart, the resilient, the woman who never made a move without calculating the risk, had just done the most impractical and reckless thing of her life. She'd gotten into a car with a man who was, without any question, dangerous. The cold, damp misery of the street was fading, replaced by the dry, circulating heat of the car, but a new kind of chill was settling over her, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was out of the rain, yes, but she had a terrible, sinking feeling that she had just walked into the very center of a much larger and much darker storm. The silence in the car stretched, thick and heavy. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear, that same unwelcome, prickling curiosity that had pulled her from the street was growing, like a weed pushing through concrete. She had spent 10 years building walls to protect herself from a man like Cameron. She had never, in all her careful, meticulous planning, designed a single defense for a man like this. The presentation had been a triumph. Alyssa stood in the glass-walled conference room on the 47th floor, the city of New York sprawling beneath her like a map of her own conquests. The clients, a skeptical consortium of Japanese investors, were finally smiling. They had approved her designs, the bold, soaring lines of glass and steel that would rewrite a forgotten corner of the skyline. The head investor, an older gentleman, had bowed to her, a gesture of profound respect. "Your vision is formidable," he had said. his English precise. Formidable. She held on to that word. It was her armor. She was Alyssa, the formidable architect. She was packing her briefcase, the adrenaline of the wind still humming in her veins, when her assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, hurried in. Sarah's face was flushed, her eyes wide. "Alyssa, this was just delivered. By courier, not a service. I mean, a man in a black suit. He waited for me to sign." She handed over an envelope. It was not an envelope. It was a small, stiff card, easily 5 times the thickness of normal stationery. It was cream-colored, impossibly heavy, with edges of dark, burnished gold. Her name, Alyssa, was written across the front in a perfect, flowing script, just her first name. She slid her fingernail under the wax seal. It was not a crest, just a simple, stylized D inside. The invitation was engraved, the letters raised and sharp to the touch. "You are invited for cocktails and conversation, 8 o'clock this evening, the home of Thomas D'Angelo." An address was listed below, an address she recognized, a sprawling, fortress-like penthouse on the Upper East Side, a building that was spoken of but rarely seen. Thomas D'Angelo. Alyssa's blood ran cold, the warmth of her victory vanishing in an instant. No one in New York did not know that name. It was a phantom, a whisper, a man with no official business, no listed company, and yet he held the city in the palm of his hand. He was a political figure, which was the polite term. He was a fixer. He was, as everyone knew and no one dared to say, the boss, the head of the D'Angelo family, the most powerful and dangerous mafia organization in the country. This was not an invitation. It was a summons. She was an architect. She built buildings. She did not associate with men who, according to rumor, sometimes put people in the foundations of them. Why her was this about her new project? Did he have an interest? She felt a prickle of fear, but beneath it, a sharp, unwelcome spike of curiosity. This was the real New York, the one that existed in the shadows beneath the gleaming towers she built. She had spent 10 years building her career, her fortress. Was this an invitation inside a real one? She looked at the card. Not attending was not an option. That, she knew, would be an insult. It would be a weakness. She met her own eyes in the reflection of the conference room window. Formidable, she whispered to herself. She would go. She would wear her armor. At 8:30 that evening, she stepped out of a cab onto a quiet, tree-lined street. The building was old money, a fortress of granite and limestone, with a wrought iron gate and a doorman who looked more like a bodyguard. He did not ask her name. He simply looked at her, nodded once, and opened the door. An elevator, all dark mahogany and brass, opened directly into the penthouse. The doors slid open not onto a hallway, but onto the party itself. The room was vast. 2 stories of glass looked out over a glittering, rain-slicked Central Park. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume, old scotch, and an undercurrent of raw, undeniable power. There was no loud music, just the low, confident hum of conversation, the clinking of heavy crystal glasses. This was not a party. This was a court. Men in flawless, dark suits stood in small clusters, their voices low. Women draped in silks and dripping with jewels watched the room with sharp, intelligent eyes. Alyssa felt a sudden, sharp pang of being an imposter, her own expensive, minimalist black dress suddenly feeling like a cheap costume. She took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the crystal flute cold and heavy in her hand. She scanned the room, looking for the host. She could not see him. But she saw someone else. Her heart stopped. It did not just beat faster. It stopped, seized, and then slammed against her ribs with a sickening, painful thud. Cameron Price. He was standing near the massive fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked incredible. His blonde hair was artfully mussed. His suit was a perfect deep blue, and his smile, that smile, it was the one he used for the cameras, the one that promised the world, the one that had broken her life. He was laughing, his head tilted back, the picture of effortless, golden charm. He was the last person she had expected to see. What was he? The city's golden boy, the future of legitimate politics, doing at the home of a mafia boss? The question died in her throat as a cold realization settled over her. Of course he was here. This was where the real power was. His entire career, his entire life, was a lie. He turned, as if sensing her gaze, and his eyes locked with hers across the crowded room. His smile did not falter, but it changed. The warmth vanished. His eyes, the blue eyes she had once thought held the sky, went cold and flat. It was not surprise. It was annoyance. It was the look of a man finding a stain on his new carpet. And then, he did the cruelest thing he could have possibly done. He smiled wider. He turned, deliberately, to the young woman standing beside him. A woman Alyssa had not even registered. She was beautiful, of course. Young, probably 24, with a cascade of dark hair and a dress that was a whisper of red silk. He put his arm around her waist, a gesture of clear, public ownership, and he began to walk her directly toward Alyssa. He was not just going to ignore her. He was going to confront her. He was going to present his new life to her, as if she were a constituent to be charmed. Alyssa's feet felt like they were bolted to the floor. She could not breathe. This was not happening. She could feel the stares of the people around them, the sudden, subtle shift in the room's energy as people sensed a confrontation. "Alyssa," he said, his voice a smooth, buttery performance. "I was wondering if I would see you here. It has been such a long time, has not it?" It had been 6 months. 6 months since he had vanished. 10 years of her life erased without a word. "Cameron?" she said. Her own voice sounded brittle, thin. She could feel a cold sweat on the back of her neck. "I want you to meet someone," he said, pulling the young woman closer. "This is Elizabeth Bancroft." He paused, letting the famous last name hang in the air. Bancroft. Banking. Old money. "Elizabeth, this is Alyssa. We worked together a long time ago on some city projects." "We worked together." The words hit her like a physical slap. 10 years, living together, sharing a bed, sharing dreams, planning a future. He had reduced it all to we worked together. He had not just erased her. He was rewriting history, in public, in front of the most powerful people in the city. He was branding her as a footnote, a junior colleague. He was humiliating her. "A pleasure to meet you, Alyssa," the girl, Elizabeth, said. Her voice was bright, clear, and utterly unaware. "Cameron has told me so little about his early days." "I am sure he has not." Alyssa said. The words were sharp, and she saw a flicker of surprise in Cameron's eyes. He had expected her to be broken, to stammer, to fade away. She held his gaze, her entire body shaking with a fury so cold and pure it almost choked her. She saw him for what he was, not a golden boy, not a rising star, just a weak, terrified, ambitious man who would burn anyone, anything to get what he wanted. He was a parasite. She gave him a smile, a tight, cold architect's smile, all hard lines and no warmth. "If you will excuse me, Cameron, Elizabeth, enjoy your evening." She turned, her back straight, her head high. It was the most difficult thing she had ever done. She could feel his eyes on her back. She could feel the smirks of the people watching. She felt raw, exposed, flayed open. Her armor was gone. She was just the girl in the rain again, locked out, with everyone watching. She took 2 steps toward the exit, her only thought to flee, to get out, to be anywhere else. And she walked directly into a wall. Except it was not a wall. It was a man. She stumbled back, a small gasp escaping her, and looked up. It was him, Thomas D'Angelo. She had only seen photographs, grainy and taken from a distance. They did him no justice. He was taller than she had expected, broader. His suit was black, simple and perfect, making every other man in the room look like a boy. His face was the one she had seen in her research, the one from the storm she had not yet lived, stark, strong, with a mouth that looked like it had never smiled, and eyes, his eyes. They were dark, almost black, and they were locked on her. He had not been moving. He had been standing there, waiting. He had been watching. He had seen all of it. The arrival, Cameron, the handshake, the humiliation, her cold, furious retreat. He had seen everything. His gaze was not sympathetic. It was not kind. It was not even curious. It was knowing. It was the most intense, invasive stare she had ever felt. It was as if he was looking right through her, past the trembling facade, past the formidable architect, and seeing the raw, burning wound underneath. It felt as if this entire horrible encounter had been staged for his benefit. The entire sprawling, noisy room seemed to vanish. The hum of conversation, the clinking glasses, the presence of Cameron just a few feet away, it all dissolved into a dull, distant roar. The only thing in the world was this man's unblinking, dark gaze. He said nothing for a long, agonizing moment. He just looked. Then his voice, low and cold, cut through the silence. "Come with me." It was not a question. It was not an offer of rescue. It was a command. It was the same command she would hear. Weeks later, in a storm. This was the beginning. Alyssa, the woman who had built her life on her own terms, the woman who answered to no one, looked into the eyes of the most dangerous man in New York. She heard the echo of Cameron's dismissive, cruel voice, and she felt the raw, scalding shame. And she knew, with a terrifying, absolute certainty, that she was going to do exactly what he said. He did not take her hand. He simply turned, and she followed him, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The crowd parted for him, people stepping back with murmured, respectful greetings that he did not acknowledge. Cameron, she noted with a distant, cold satisfaction, was frozen by the fireplace, his face pale, his drink held halfway to his mouth, watching her walk away with the one man in the room he truly feared. Thomas D'Angelo led her not to a balcony, not to a quiet corner of the party, but to a solid, unmarked door she had assumed was a closet. He pushed it open, revealing a dark, paneled hallway. The bright noise of the party was cut off instantly. He led her down the hall and into a room. It was his study. It was vast, silent and dark, lit only by a single green banker's lamp on a desk the size of a car. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, old, leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and paper. The windows were dark, looking out over a different, quieter part of the city. The air was heavy, still. He walked to the desk but did not sit. He stood behind it, a shadow against the dim light. He watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. She stood in the middle of the room, feeling small, exposed, and vibrating with a toxic mix of adrenaline and shame. "He humiliated you," Thomas said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. "He's an old acquaintance," Alyssa said, her voice tight. "It was nothing." "You are a terrible liar," he replied, his voice a low, flat monotone. "You stood there, smiling while you calculated the exact force needed to break your champagne flute against his teeth. You have rage in you. I find that interesting." Alyssa's breath hitched. He had not just seen her humiliation. He had seen her fury. He had seen the calculation she prided herself on, the cold architectural part of her brain that was, in that moment, planning a precise, violent demolition. Cameron had seen her as a decoration. This man saw her as a weapon. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice stronger now. Because you were disrupting my party," he said simply. "Not you, him, his weakness. It is an offensive smell." He paused, straightening a heavy silver letter opener on his desk. "And because I wanted to see if what I had heard was true." "What had you heard?" "That you are formidable, Vane," he said, using the same word the Japanese investor had used. But coming from him, it sounded different. It sounded darker. that you build things that are not supposed to stand, that you fight unions and zoning boards and win. I'm a good architect, she said. You are a good fighter, he corrected. You just happen to use steel and glass. He looked up at her, his gaze pinning her in place. He hurt you, a long time ago. He took something from you, and you have spent 10 years building a fortress around the wound, a very beautiful, very expensive fortress. She said nothing. She could not breathe. He saw everything. The driver is downstairs, he said, abruptly dismissing her. He will take you home. She stared at him, baffled. That was it. He summons her, strips her bare with a few words, and then sends her away. I have my own car, she said stiffly. Your driver's name is Antonio, he said, ignoring her. He will ensure you arrive safely. He turned away, looking down at some papers on his desk. She was no longer of interest. She was dismissed. Alyssa, the formidable, independent woman, turned and walked out of the study, her cheeks burning. She felt like she had just survived something. She was not sure if it was an interrogation, a recruitment, or a seduction. In the weeks that followed, Thomas D'Angelo did not call. He did not appear. But his presence was everywhere. It started subtly. A building permit for her flagship project, one that had been buried in bureaucratic red tape for 3 months, was suddenly approved, stamped, signed, and delivered overnight. There was no explanation. Then, a rival firm, a massive corporate giant that had been trying to poach her clients, abruptly withdrew their bid on a project she was competing for. The chief executive officer, a man who had publicly dismissed her as a boutique designer, sent her a personal email wishing her success. She was at lunch with a client at the Grill, one of the city's most exclusive power hubs. As she was explaining a design, she felt a shift in the room. The ambient noise dropped. She looked up. Thomas D'Angelo was walking to a table in the far corner. He was flanked by 2 other men, shadows in dark suits. He did not look at her. He sat, took a menu, and began to speak to his companions. But she felt him. His presence was a gravitational pull, bending the light in the room. He owned the space. She tried to focus on her client, but her mind was racing. This was his world. This was the city beneath the city she knew. The world of calculations, of quiet, unseen transactions that made the visible world function. She had spent her career mastering the laws of physics, of concrete curing times and wind shear. He mastered the laws of human nature, of greed and fear and ambition. She found herself struggling. A deep, profound conflict was brewing inside her. She, Alyssa, the self-made woman, was suddenly benefiting from an invisible, unasked-for patronage. It infuriated her. It felt like a violation of the very fortress she had built. She had not asked for his help. She did not need his help. But another, quieter part of her, a part she hated, was thrilled. She was so tired of fighting, so tired of battling for every single inch, of having to be 10 times better than the men around her just to be considered equal. The feeling of those barriers simply dissolving in front of her was intoxicating. It was a drug. And there was him. And he was nothing like Cameron. Cameron was a taker. He had fed on her energy, her ideas, her love, and given nothing back but empty promises. Thomas D'Angelo. He had seen her rage, her worst, most violent impulse, and he had called it interesting. He did not want to change her, or soften her, or use her as a pretty backdrop. He seemed to want to aim her. She was an architect. She admired strong foundations. Cameron was a facade, a cheap curtain wall of charm and charisma. Thomas D'Angelo was bedrock. He was the granite foundation of the city itself. She was terrified of him. And she was, to her absolute horror, drawn to him. This internal war raged until the day her new skyscraper, the Japanese project, hit a wall. A city councilman named Miller, a notoriously difficult man, had suddenly raised an objection to her zoning variance. It was a minor technicality, but he was threatening to hold up the entire project, costing her clients millions of dollars a week. She tried to reason with him. She sent him the engineering reports, the environmental impact studies. His office refused her calls. She was in her studio late one night at 9 o'clock, staring at the blueprints, a knot of cold failure tightening in her stomach, when her private line rang. "He is a problem, this Councilman Miller." It was Thomas. He did not say hello. "How did you get this number?" Alyssa demanded, her heart leaping into her throat. "He likes money," Thomas continued, as if she had not spoken. "But more than that, he likes to feel important. He is a small man who wants a big chair. Your logic means nothing to him." "I will handle it," she said. "No, you will not," he said. There was no anger, just a flat certainty. "You cannot. You are not speaking his language." There was a pause. "I'm having dinner tomorrow night at my restaurant, Fellini's, at 8 o'clock. You will be there." It was not a question. It was a command. He hung up. The next night, she went. Fellini's was a small, unassuming place in Greenwich Village. When she arrived, the closed sign was on the door. A man, the same driver, Antonio, was waiting. He opened the door. The restaurant was empty, save for one table in the back, covered in a white cloth, set for two. Thomas was already there, a glass of red wine in his hand. "You came," he said as she sat. "You knew I would," she said. He almost smiled. It was not a smile, really, just a slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. "Councilman Miller will no longer be a problem. Your variance will be approved by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning." She stared at him. "Just like that." "Just like that." "And what," she asked, her voice steady, "is the price?" He leaned forward, the candlelight catching the sharp planes of his face. "I am not Cameron Price. I do not deal in lies and whispers. I do not take what is not offered. This is the world, Alyssa. You can stand outside in the rain, beating on a locked door, or you can have a key." He reached into his pocket and placed a single, old-fashioned skeleton key on the table between them. It was heavy, iron. "What is this for?" she whispered. "It is your choice," he said. "You can continue to build your buildings, fighting for every brick, or you can come and sit at the table where the blueprints for the entire city are drawn. But if you sit at this table, you sit with me. You belong to me." Her breath caught. "You belong to me." It was the most terrifying, antiquated, possessive thing a man had ever said to her, and yet it felt honest. It was a transaction, an exchange of power. She looked at the key. This was it, the crossroads, her life, her career, her carefully constructed independence, or this dark, terrifying, intoxicating world of absolute power. She was still looking at the key when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Cameron. "Alyssa, I just heard something crazy. Call me. We need to talk. I am worried about you." She looked at the message. "I am worried about you." The same false, manipulative concern. A week ago, it might have rattled her. Now, it just felt pathetic. 2 days later, the variance was approved at 9:55 in the morning. Cameron was waiting for her outside her office. He looked frantic. His perfect blonde hair was a mess. His eyes were wide, panicked. "Alyssa, thank God! What are you doing? Are you insane?" he hissed, grabbing her arm. She pulled her arm away, slowly, deliberately. "Do not touch me, Cameron. I am trying to help you. I heard you had dinner with D'Angelo at Fellini's alone. Do you know who he is? He's not just some political fixer. He's a monster. He will eat you alive. He's dangerous." She looked at him. The golden boy, the future of the city. He was terrified. Not for her. She could see it in his eyes. He was terrified of her. He was terrified that she had found a bigger, stronger predator. "You seem very concerned," she said, her voice like ice. "Of course I am concerned. We have history. I do not want to see you get hurt." Alyssa laughed. It was a short, cold, bitter sound. "Hurt, you mean like when you introduced me to your new fiancé as someone you worked with? Or do you mean hurt like when you vanished from my life after 10 years without a single word, that kind of hurt, Cameron?" His face went white, then red. That was different. That was politics. This is life and death. It is all politics, Cameron's, she said. She adjusted the cuff of her jacket. You just were not very good at it. Your tricks do not work anymore. Your smile, your fake concern. It is like a magic trick where everyone can see the strings. It is just sad. She started to walk past him. Alyssa, wait, he pleaded, again, his voice cracking. Do not do this. He will destroy you. She paused, turning to look at him one last time. The man she had loved. The man who had broken her. He looked small, weak, and utterly irrelevant. He will not destroy me, Cameron, she said. He's the only man in this entire city who has ever actually seen me. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a building to get built. That moment, her dismissal of Cameron outside her office, was the final click of a lock falling into place. It was not just a rejection of him, it was an acceptance of herself. She had spent a decade building a fortress of steel and glass. Now, she had allied herself with a man made of granite and shadow. She had chosen her side. She had picked up the key. Her life simplified and complicated itself all at once. Her work, the part that had been a constant, grinding battle, became effortless. Projects were approved. Bids were accepted. Rival firms, sensing the new, invisible weight behind her name, stepped aside. She was, for the first time, judged purely on her architectural vision, because the mundane static of politics and prejudice had been silenced. Her relationship with Thomas D'Angelo was not a romance, not in any conventional sense. It was an alliance, a convergence of two similar minds. There were no flowers, no sweet words, no stolen kisses in the rain. Their meetings were dinners at Fellini's. The restaurant always empty, save for them. They were conversations in his dark, book-lined study, where he would ask her opinion on a new city development, on the structural weaknesses of a rival's organization, on the psychology of a difficult politician. He did not coddle her. He did not praise her beauty. He praised her mind. He listened to her strategic dissections of a problem with a still, focused intensity that was more intimate than any touch she had ever known. He valued her intellect, her calculation, her cold, precise anger. He was not trying to save her from the darkness. He was showing her how to command it. But this new power came with a price. She was no longer just Alyssa, the formidable architect. She was, in the whispers of the city's underworld, his, and that made her a target. The attack came, as she should have known it would, from Cameron. He was a desperate animal now. His humiliation at the party, his public dismissal by her, and his terror of her new alliance had pushed him over the edge. He was no longer just trying to save his career. He was trying to destroy hers. She received an official, gold-embossed notification. The Keystone Project, her masterpiece, the Japanese-funded skyscraper, was being called into an emergency stakeholders review by the City Planning Commission. The reason cited was grave concerns regarding structural integrity and potential conflicts of interest arising from improper political influence. It was a declaration of war. Cameron, using his last shreds of political capital, was attempting to murder her career in public. He was not just attacking her, he was attacking Thomas, using her as the weapon. He was trying to prove to the city that D'Angelo's new associate was a liability, that his influence was corrupt, and that she, the architect, was incompetent. She found Thomas on the private terrace of his penthouse, staring down at the city. The night was cold and clear. He has allied himself with the Vitali family, Thomas said, without turning. He already knew. Of course he knew. They are old enemies. They have been looking for a way to wound me for a year. Cameron, in his stupidity, just handed them a knife. He's using my building, Alyssa said, her voice a low, cold thread of fury. He thinks he is, Thomas corrected. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the moonlight. I can make this stop. I can make one phone call. The meeting will be canceled. The Vitali family will find themselves occupied with a federal customs raid. Assemblyman Price will be buried in an audit so deep he will not see daylight for 5 years. You will not have to lift a finger. This was it. The decision, her fortress, the one she had built, had been breached. She could let her new, powerful ally defend it for her. She could stay safe behind his walls, his protected asset, or she could fight. She remembered standing in the rain, locked out, helpless. She remembered Cameron's dismissive smile. She looked at Thomas, the man who had seen her rage and called it interesting. "No," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "He's not attacking you. He's attacking me. He's questioning my work. He's doing it in my city. I will not hide while you fight my battles." Thomas watched her for a long, silent moment. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was that rare, almost smile. It was approval. It was respect. "He thinks you are a vulnerability," Thomas murmured. "He has no idea that you are the weapon." He nodded, satisfied. "Very well. He wants a war. You will give him one. What do you need?" "Ammunition," Alyssa said. "He's bringing a knife. I want to bring a cannon. I need everything you have. I need the real reason the Vitali family is angry with you. I need the personal debts of every politician on that planning commission. I need the name of the structural engineer Cameron has paid to lie. And I need to know where his weaknesses are. I am not going to defend my building. Thomas, I am going to dismantle him." He gave a single, sharp nod. "It will be on your desk within the hour." The City Planning Commission boardroom was a theater of power. It was vast, paneled in dark wood, with a ceiling so high it felt like a courthouse. The room was packed. Her Japanese investors were in the front row, their faces rigid with concern. City council members, political reporters, lobbyists, and her rivals were all here, vultures gathered for a public execution. At the head of the room, at the long, raised table, sat Cameron Price. He looked reborn. His blonde hair was perfect. His suit was a deep, authoritative charcoal. He looked grave, concerned, the very picture of civic duty. Beside him sat 2 older men in expensive suits, their faces impassive, Antonio and Paolo Vitali. Alyssa walked in alone. She wore a severe, dark red suit, the color of dried blood. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it emphasized the sharp, angular lines of her face. She looked like a blade. She sat at the solitary table designated for the defense, opened her briefcase, and laid out a single file. Cameron began. His voice was smooth, filled with false regret. "We are here today not to cast aspersions, but to protect the integrity of our city's skyline. The Keystone Project, while aesthetically brilliant, has been rushed. Regulations have been overlooked. We have evidence of undue influence, of meetings held in private." He glanced at her. "That suggests this project was approved not on its merits, but on personal connections." He then introduced his expert, a nervous-looking engineer who presented a fraudulent, jargon-filled report suggesting critical flaws in her wind shear calculations. It was all lies, but it was technical, and it was terrifying to the investors. Cameron took the floor again. "This is not just mismanagement, it is a danger to our citizens. I am asking the Commission to halt this project indefinitely, pending a full, independent review." The room was silent. The press was scribbling. Her investors looked ill. Cameron looked at her. His eyes filled with a triumphant, cold pity. He thought he had won. Alyssa stood up. She walked not to the podium, but to the center of the floor, so she was standing directly in front of him. "Thank you, Assemblyman Price," she said, her voice clear and cold, carrying to every corner of the room. "Your sudden, passionate concern for structural integrity is truly moving." She did not look at her file. She did not need to. She had memorized it. "You are correct that regulations are important, which is why I was fascinated by the engineer's report." She turned her gaze to the nervous engineer. "A report commissioned and paid for, according to my records, by Vitali Imports, Incorporated." The Vitali brothers did not move, but a ripple went through the crowd. "I found that curious. Alyssa continued, her tone light, conversational. Why would an olive oil importer be so concerned with wind shear? Perhaps because their last 3 shipping containers, which I am told were filled with European electronics, were seized at the port of Newark. An action, I believe, that was initiated by a tip from a concerned citizen. A tip that, I am told, originated from an anonymous call from Mr. D'Angelo's office. The blood drained from Cameron's face. The Vitali brothers were no longer impassive. Their eyes were fixed on Cameron with pure, cold hatred. She had just exposed him. He had not just failed. He had brought them into a trap. "But let us talk about the integrity of this commission," Alyssa said, turning to the politicians at the table. "Councilman Miller, your original objection to my project was, I am sure, based on pure civic duty. And I am certain your sudden change of heart had nothing to do with the fact that your son's gambling debts, totaling some $80,000, were suddenly forgiven by the D'Angelo Family Trust." Councilman Miller looked like he was going to be sick. Alyssa went on, "And Councilwoman Breyer, your charity for underprivileged youth is truly noble. It was so fortunate that it received a $50,000 anonymous donation just 1 day before the vote. A donation my accountants traced back to a holding company owned by me." The room was in stunned silence. She had not just confirmed her association with Thomas D'Angelo. She had owned it. She had exposed the inner workings of the entire system, revealing that everyone in the room was compromised, that everyone operated on influence. She had changed the equation. They could not condemn her without condemning themselves. She let the silence hang, thick and heavy. Then she turned her full, undivided attention to Cameron. "Assemblyman Price is the only one here, it seems, who is truly concerned with ethics," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "He speaks of personal connections and undue influence. He is an expert on the subject." She took a step closer to his table. He looked small, trapped. "For 10 years, she said, her voice dropping but no less intense. "Assemblyman Price and I were involved in a committed, personal relationship. We lived together. We planned a future. During that time, he asked me, repeatedly, to use my designs and my connections to benefit his political donors. I refused. When he achieved the political status he desired, he discarded me. He left my life, without a single word, to pursue a more politically advantageous engagement." She looked at Elizabeth Bancroft's father, who was sitting in the 3rd row. "When I would not be used by him, he tried to erase me. When he could not erase me, he tried to befriend me. And when he failed at that, he allied himself with his new friends," she nodded at the Vitali brothers, "to destroy me, to destroy my work." She looked back at Cameron. His face was gray. His career was over. He was exposed, not as a crusader, but as a petty, vindictive, failed lover. "This meeting is not about a building," she said, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "It is about a weak, terrified man who cannot stand the sight of a woman who built her own fortress. Instead of simply decorating his, my calculations are flawless. My permits are legal. My building is sound. You," and she pointed a single steady finger at him, "are a facade, a cheap, poorly constructed facade, and you have just been condemned." She did not wait for a vote. She did not wait for a dismissal. She picked up her single file, closed her briefcase, and turned to her investors. "I will see you at the groundbreaking next Tuesday." She walked out of the boardroom. The silence behind her was absolute, a vacuum left in the wake of her power. He was waiting for her in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his black car just visible through the glass doors, Thomas D'Angelo. He was alone. She stopped in front of him. The adrenaline was pounding through her, a white-hot, pure energy. She was not shaking from fear. She was vibrating with victory. He looked at her, his dark eyes moving over her face, seeing every detail, every spark of fire in her eyes. That fractional smile touched his lips. It was real this time. It was profound respect. "You did not defend your building," he said, his voice a low, appreciative murmur. "There was nothing to defend," she said, her voice steady. "You did not use logic. You did not use physics. You did not even use architecture." She met his gaze, unflinching. "No," she said. "I used your language." He nodded. A single, sharp gesture of complete understanding. He pushed himself off the wall and moved to the glass doors, opening one for her. He gestured to the car, its dark interior waiting. "Inside," he said. This time, it was not a command. It was not an offer of sanctuary from a storm. It was an invitation to a throne. She smiled, a true, cold, brilliant smile, and walked past him into the new world she had just claimed for herself. The car door shut with the same solid, final thunk as the first time. The silence that enveloped them was absolute, a void that insulated them from the world she had just set on fire. The long black car pulled away from the curb, gliding into the afternoon traffic with its customary, impossible smoothness. Alyssa sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap, her briefcase at her feet. The adrenaline was a high, clean hum in her blood, a feeling of pure, cold power. She had just publicly executed a man's career, dismantled his alliances, and exposed the city's corrupt heart, all without raising her voice. Thomas did not look at her. He stared out his own window, his profile as stark and unmoving as granite. He was not a man who offered congratulations. Praise was a tool, and she had just proven she no longer required it. "Cameron Price is finished," he said, his voice a flat statement of fact. "His fiancée's family will sever all ties by evening. The party will disavow him by morning. He will be lucky if he is not disbarred within 6 months." "He made a critical error," Alyssa said, her own voice sounding distant to her ears. "He mistook his ambition for strength. He built his foundation on sand." "And the Vitalis," Thomas continued, as if she had not spoken, his mind already 3 moves ahead. "They will not forget this. They will not be angry with you. They will be angry with him for being a fool. But they will be angry with me for making them look like fools." "They are your problem," she stated simply. He turned his head then, his dark eyes finally locking on her. The fractional smile was gone. In its place was a look of deep, profound assessment, as if he was seeing her for the first time, not as an interesting weapon, but as an equal. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They are our problem." That one word, "our," settled over her. It was heavier than any ring, more binding than any contract. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance. It was the sound of a new, massive, load-bearing wall locking into place. The fortress she had built for herself was gone. They were now building a citadel together. She realized, in that quiet, moving car, that the victory in the boardroom had not been about Cameron. The fiery, scalding need for revenge that had driven her for 10 years had vanished. In its place was not triumph, but a cold, clean sense of order. She had not destroyed Cameron to punish him for the past. She had removed him because he was a structural flaw in her future. He was not a demon to be exorcised. He was just a poorly designed element, and she was, above all, an architect. She had just completed a necessary, if brutal, demolition. Her old life was over, the life of Alyssa, the independent, solitary architect, the woman who fought for every contract, who built her fortress against the world. That woman had walked into the commission boardroom, but she had not walked out. A new life began. It was a life lived in the deep, quiet, powerful currents that ran beneath the city. Her work, her architecture, became effortless. Her firm was suddenly inundated with contracts, not just for skyscrapers, but for private hospitals, for discreet bank headquarters, for redesigning the lobbies of the city's most powerful and private buildings. Her name was no longer just a name. It was a brand. It signified not just brilliant design, but an unassailable, unspoken connection to the true seat of power. Her Japanese investors, once nervous, were now her most devoted clients. They bowed to her, not just in respect for her talent, but in awe of her influence. Her rivals did not just step aside, they actively sought her partnership. She had not just joined the game, she had become the board. The whispers in the city changed. She was no longer just Alyssa. She was D'Angelo's woman. This, she found, was the largest misconception. The elegant women at society functions, the wives and mistresses of powerful men, would approach her with a veiled, pitying curiosity. They saw her as a possession, a beautiful, intelligent pet he had acquired. They thought she had traded her independence for safety, her soul for his protection. They had no idea. She had not been acquired, she had been recruited. Her evenings were no longer spent at her own empty, minimalist apartment. She spent them at his penthouse or in the back room of Fellini's, but she was not there for romantic dinners. She was there for meetings. The first time he brought her into his study during a business discussion, the air in the room had frozen. The three men sitting in the leather chairs were not the polished politicians or fawning developers she was used to. These were his capos, older men with scarred knuckles, quiet voices, and eyes that had seen far too much. They were the men who ran his operations, the true structural columns of his empire. They looked at her, this woman in her sharp, tailored suit, with a mixture of disbelief and open suspicion. One of them, a thick-set man named Russo, who controlled the unions, had openly scoffed when Thomas asked for her opinion on a new Port Authority investment. "With respect, boss," Russo had said, his voice a gravelly rasp, "what does an architect know about unloading cargo?" Alyssa had not looked at Thomas. She did not ask for permission. She stood up from her chair by the fire and walked to the large table in the center of the room, where blueprints for the new port facility were unrolled. "You are right, Mr. Russo," she said, her voice cutting through the smoky air. "I do not know about cargo, but I know about logistics, and I know about structural flaws." She placed one long finger on the center of the map. "Your entire plan hinges on this access road," she said, "but this road cannot support the weight of the trucks you plan to use. Not for the volume you are projecting. The substrate is too weak. It will fail within 6 months. Not catastrophically, but it will crack. It will require constant, expensive repairs. Repairs that will have to be authorized, of course, by the city." She then pointed to a different spot. "And this warehouse, you have placed it here for its proximity to the water, but you have not accounted for the new floodplain data. The city just rezoned this entire area. The foundation you will be required to build will cost 30% more than your budget allows, and the insurance will be astronomical. You are building a losing investment." She looked up, meeting Russo's stunned, angry gaze. "You are not building a cargo depot, Mr. Russo. You are building a money pit. You are focusing on the cargo. You have forgotten the structure." She walked back to her chair and sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. Russo stared at the map, his face pale. The other two men were looking at her, their suspicion gone, replaced by a new, startling respect. Thomas D'Angelo, who had watched the entire exchange without a word, took a slow sip of his whiskey. He looked at his capo. "Do you have any other questions about logistics for Miss Alyssa Russo?" he murmured. Russo shook his head, his eyes still glued to the blueprint. "No, boss, I see the problem." She had not just won an argument. She had established her territory. She was not the boss's mistress. She was the consigliere. She was the strategist. She saw the structural flaws in their world that they were blind to. She was the architect, and her new, grand project was their entire organization. She began to understand that she had not, in fact, given up her freedom. She had merely redefined it. She had spent 10 years building a fortress to keep the world out, a fortress to protect her from men like Cameron Price. But a fortress, she realized, is also a prison. It is a static, defensive structure. What Thomas D'Angelo had offered her was not a fortress. It was a kingdom. It was the freedom to not just build, but to plan, to not just react, but to act. She was no longer a solitary woman fighting for her own survival. She was a queen, sitting beside a king, designing the very world they moved through. She had not been absorbed into his life. She had integrated with it, and in doing so, she had become more herself than she had ever been. The old pain, the wound that Cameron had left, was gone. It had not been healed. It had been rendered obsolete. She was no longer the girl locked out in the rain. She was the woman who owned the city, and she was, finally, in perfect control of her own magnificent, terrifying, and limitless destiny. The city was theirs. This was not a grand, romantic realization. It was a simple statement of architectural fact, from the gleaming, bold lines of her skyscrapers that redefined the skyline, to the deep, unseen foundations of power that Thomas controlled. They had rebuilt New York in their own image. Their relationship was not a marriage, but it was far more binding. There was no public ceremony, no exchange of rings. Instead, there was a quiet, profound transfer of assets. Thomas had signed over a 20% stake in his holding companies to a new corporation, a corporation solely owned by Alyssa. He had not given her a gift. He had made her a partner. He had given her an equal stake in the foundations. In return, she had moved her life. Her minimalist apartment, that monument to her old, cold solitude, was sold. She now lived with him in the granite and glass fortress of his penthouse. But it was no longer just his. She had redesigned it. She tore down the dark, heavy walls of his study, replacing them with floor-to-ceiling glass, letting the light of her city pour in. She replaced the heavy, antique furniture with clean, modern lines. She built a new empire of light and steel inside his old world of shadow and stone. He had watched the entire chaotic, loud demolition and renovation with a quiet, unreadable amusement. He had not questioned a single choice. He trusted his architect. Their life was a rhythm of seamless, shared power. In the mornings, she oversaw her firm, which was now the most sought-after architectural house in the country, building museums, opera houses, and new, audacious towers. In the evenings, she sat beside him, not as a consort, but as his chief strategist. The men who had once looked at her with suspicion, men like Russo, now brought their problems to her first. She was the one who saw the structural flaws. She was the one who designed the solutions. Thomas was the king, the final authority, the granite foundation. But she was the architect. She drew the blueprints for their entire world. She had learned to stand in the center of his world, not as an outsider, but as its co-creator. She learned the language of his business, a language of favors, debts, and precise, calculated pressure. She learned to read the men who came to them, to see the fear behind their bravado, the greed behind their loyalty. She'd not become him. She'd not become colder or harder. She'd simply become more. She was a woman who, having been locked out in the rain, had decided to not just buy the building, but to redesign the entire city block. One night, she was working late in their new, glass-walled study, reviewing the plans for a new children's hospital she was designing. This was her own project, one she was funding personally, a piece of light and hope in the center of their complex world. Thomas was in Chicago, handling a dispute with another family. He was due back in 2 days. She was looking for a specific engineering file, a soil report from a decade ago. She went to the old, massive desk, the one piece of his original study he had insisted on keeping. It was a relic, a monstrous piece of mahogany, but she understood his attachment. It had been his father's. She opened the deep bottom drawer, searching for the old archive files. Her fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound book at the very back, hidden beneath a stack of old ledgers. It was not a file. It was a diary, or perhaps a journal. Curiosity, that old, familiar prickle, moved her hand. This was his. She knew. It was private. She, who valued strategy and information, knew the sanctity of a locked room, of a hidden file. But she also knew him. Theirs was not a relationship built on secrets. It was built on the cold, hard currency of truth. He had seen every part of her, her rage, her ambition, her calculation. She had no secrets from him. She had assumed he had none from her. She opened the book. The handwriting was his, that same precise, dark script. But it was not a journal. It was a ledger, not of money, but of people. She read the first entry. It was a name. Cameron Price, junior assemblyman, arrogant, weak, easily manipulated. Attached to a woman, Alyssa, architect, brilliant, focused, unbroken, being discarded. An asset being thrown away. Keep watch. Alyssa's breath caught. She stared at the words. Keep watch. She turned the page. Another entry, dated a year later. Alyssa, won the Redman contract, beat 2 major firms. She fights. Good. She turned another. 6 months after that. Alyssa, attended the zoning gala, ignored by Price. She did not break. She watched. She is calculating. She's almost ready. Page after page, he had been documenting her. He had been tracking her career, her projects, her public appearances for years, long before the party, long before the rain. She found the entry for the night of his party. Cameron Price brought his new girl, insulted Alyssa publicly. Good. The final pressure test, he broke the facade. She is all fire and ice underneath. Time to bring her in. Her heart was not pounding. It was cold. A slow, deep chill was spreading through her. This was not a rescue. This was not a coincidence. This was not an alliance formed by chance in the middle of a social war. This was an acquisition. This was the longest, most patient, most meticulous architectural project of his entire life. He had not just stumbled upon her. He had not just seen her potential in that one moment of humiliation. He had watched her. He had studied her. He had waited, with the patience of a predator, for the precise moment when her fortress was cracked, when she was at her most vulnerable and her most furious. He had waited until she was ready. And the storm, that first defining moment, the rain, the wind, her car. She flipped to the back of the book. The last entry was dated just a few weeks ago. Antonio, report on the car. First attempt at disabling the fob failed. Second attempt, flooding the ignition relay, was successful. The timing was perfect. She was desperate. She was angry. She got in the car. The book slipped from her fingers, landing on the glass desk with a soft, heavy thud. Her car had not died. It had been murdered. The storm, the rain, the sudden, violent deluge. He had not just used the storm. He had waited for it. He had manufactured the moment. The entire chaotic, life-altering encounter had been a plan, a perfectly executed, ruthless, and brilliant piece of strategy. He had not saved her from the storm. He had been the storm. A cold, clear rage began to rise in her. The feeling was so familiar. It was the same fury she had felt at Cameron's betrayal. She felt used. She felt like a pawn. She felt, for one brief, terrible moment, like a fool. He had seen her as an asset. He had acquired her. He had manipulated her, just as Cameron had, but on a scale so vast, so patient, that it dwarfed Cameron's petty deceits. She stood up, her entire body rigid. She walked to the great glass wall, staring out at the city, or city, their city. The anger lasted for a full minute. It was hot and clean and powerful. And then it was gone. It did not fade. It was replaced. It was replaced by a feeling so profound, so deep, it almost buckled her knees. It was not admiration. That was too small a word. It was recognition. Cameron had used her and thrown her away because he was weak. He had been afraid of her power, afraid of her intellect, so he had tried to break her. Thomas had seen her power. He had seen her intellect. He had seen her rage, and he had decided he wanted it. He had not wanted to break her. He had wanted to unleash her. He had not seen an asset to be used and discarded. He had seen a queen for his kingdom, and he had orchestrated a war to bring her to his side. He had not lied to her, not once. He had told her, "I am not Cameron Price. I do not deal in lies and whispers. And he had not. He had simply created the conditions for her to make her own choice. He had opened the door, and she had walked through it. He had presented her with the facts, and she had chosen him. This was not a betrayal. This was a confirmation. She had spent her life building things that lasted. She admired deep foundations, brilliant design, and flawless execution. And this was the most brilliant piece of architecture she had ever seen. She picked up the leather book. She placed it back in the drawer, back under the ledgers, exactly as she had found it. She closed the drawer. She walked out of the study and into their bedroom. She went to the closet, to the small, hidden safe behind the mirror. She opened it. Inside was the heavy, iron skeleton key he had given her at Fellini's, the key to his world. She took it out. She had never carried it. It had been a symbol. Now, it was a tool. She slipped it into the pocket of her silk robe. When Thomas returned, 2 days later, he found her in the study, reading. The room was quiet, filled with the late afternoon sun. He came up behind her, putting his hands on her shoulders, his touch firm, possessive, familiar. "The Vitalis are no longer a problem," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "Good," she said, not turning. "I had Russo move the funds you set aside. I found a weakness in their Chicago holdings. It was structural. We now own their shipping routes." He was silent for a moment. He had not told her about that money or those routes. She had found them. She had acted. His hands tightened on her shoulders, a gesture of profound, almost violent pride. "You are," he murmured, "formidable." Alyssa smiled, a slow, cold, brilliant smile, for his ears only. She finally turned her head, looking up at him. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. "No, my love," she said, her voice a soft, perfect whisper. "I am not formidable." She let her fingers trail down to his shirt, to the pocket where she knew he kept his own set of keys. "I," she said, "am the architect." Thank you so much for listening to our story. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments so we can all connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our channel Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and support us by hitting that hype button. It truly helps us bring more of these stories to as many listeners as possible.